If there's no support relation between the evidence and the brain-dependent view of consciousness that is absent between any brain-independent view of consciousness and that same evidence, that, or by virtue of which, that evidence makes the brain-dependent view of consciousness better or more likely than any brain-independent view of consciousness, then there's no epistemically relevant, or for that matter, logically consistent justification to prefer a brain-dependent view of consciousness over a brain-independent view of consciousness based on that evidence. Therefore, if in light of the evidence, if it's based on the evidence that you prefer a brain-dependent view of consciousness over a brain-independent view of consciousness, right? That in virtue of which, like it's in virtue of that evidence, it's based on that evidence, that you conclude, well, it's probably the case that the consciousness is dependent on the brain, but, you know, and not the case that consciousness is independent of the brain, then, okay, you need to specify, right, the specific support relation between the between the brain-dependent view of consciousness and the relevant evidence. That is absent, right? That support relation is absent between any brain-independent view of consciousness and that evidence, such that the evidence, right, exclusively supports the brain-dependent view of consciousness, but doesn't support, or doesn't equally support, any brain-independent view of consciousness, right? Such that, in virtue of that support relation being present between a brain-dependent view of consciousness and the evidence, but absent between any brain-independent view of consciousness and that evidence, such that the evidence makes it so that brain dependence is likely, but brain independence is not as likely. That's what they need to do. That's what proponents of a brain-dependent view of consciousness who come to their conclusion based on, like, the North scientific evidence, that's what they need to do if they want to, like, a logically consistent justification for their view. Otherwise, their view just falls apart, just collapses. Their justification argument just collapses.